Hi and welcome to another Unity tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to look at networking of a 2D sprite. So this is assuming that you've already looked at the other networking tutorials and have some basic idea of how to set up a network, even though I'll go through a very quick overview of all of the steps. First of all, we need a sprite. So I have a 2D image. I'm just going to drag that into the asset folder. And with this image, to turn it into a sprite, if you select it and have a look over in the inspector, you'll be able to see at the top the texture type, and that's what you want to set to sprite. So not default, but set it to sprite. Okay, and then hit the apply button. I'm now going to add some code to make this guy turn around on the spot, so just rotate. So in the assets, let's go to create a C# file. We'll call that flip and open up that code, and inside we'll replace it with this. So we have our start function, empty start function, and you actually do need that, otherwise you'll find that your script doesn't run. And then an update function, and in the update function you can see that I've just programmed the left arrow key to rotate our object one each update around the z-axis, and then a right arrow key to rotate it -1 around the z-axis. So save that and go back into Unity. Then we want to drag and drop that flip onto our, in my case, the green monster or your sprite, and just check it by selecting the hierarchy, clicking on that sprite and having a look that it is actually attached. Now when we run this, just to check that that script is actually working, we can rotate the sprite. To make this a networked environment so that you can have two instances that are connected, you need to add your network manager. So create an empty object inside the hierarchy, and I'll just call that network manager. And then to that manager, we're going to add a network manager component. And we'll also add a network manager HUD, so we don't have to program the interface for that. Now at this time, if you press play, we should see that it will give us a interface so that we can start the network, etc. here. Now there's no point doing that yet because we don't have any characters that are networked. So to make this green monster networked, we need to add a network identity to it, which will give it a unique ID and make it and its properties sync across the network. Well, I guess it doesn't make them sync just yet, but it makes it ready for doing that. And we will also tick the local player authority so that the person who has it in whichever window has got complete control over the movements of it. Now, what's going to actually sync the rotations of this character across the network between instances is a network transform. Okay, this is this component here, and we just add that in. Now you don't need to do anything else except add it, because we're just working with a transform. In that code, we're just using the transform.rotate to rotate it. So therefore, we sync transform. Now, if you add a rigid body to your object, then you would need to sync with rigid body 2D, and we'll look at that in the next tutorial. Let's just do transforms for now. Okay, so that's all set up. What we can do with our monster is actually make a prefab of it. Just drag and drop that down there. So this is now going to be our networked game character, and I can delete it from the hierarchy. In the network manager is where we now tell a network that when we've connected, that the client will create a character or a player character, and it's going to be our green monster. So to set that up, you select the network manager and come back to network manager in the inspector. In the spawn info, just drop that down. You'll see an area for player prefab, and that's how we drag and drop our green monster into there. So the network manager will instantiate this green monster when you hit host or connect. So let's just run this. and let's hit LAN host, and there's our character, and the arrow keys are still working on it. At this point, we can build it out and test it with 2 instances. Okay, so save your scene. I've already saved it here as monster. Go into File, Build Settings, and you'll want to add your scene into here. And then we want to select the player settings before we actually do a build. What you'll want in the resolution and presentation is to actually turn off the full screen mode and give yourself a resolution. The reason I do this is that it's very hard to be testing on the same computer with 2 windows open if this keeps opening in full screen. Now, there's not much going on in our game, so a small size is fine. The other thing you'll want to do is actually disable the resolution dialog box, unless you're testing for different resolutions, obviously, because that's just another clicking through that you have to get through to actually test stuff. So this just helps to make the whole process a little bit quicker. Okay, now with all that set, we can go build and run to create our other client. And I'll just put mine on the desktop. Now, as soon as that opens, you'll see the networking window here for our other client. And we want to be able to see the game one as well that's in the editor, because we'll use that. So I'm just going to drag this out and put it up there and get that out of the road. And then press play in the editor to turn on this version. So now I have 2 instances. The one in the editor will actually make the server and host. So it's created its local character. And this one will act as a client, which will connect to this one, and it creates its local character. Now, its local character and the server's local character are actually on top of each other in exactly the same space. So if I click on the client and press the arrow keys, you'll see that it's rotating, and its transform is actually syncing over to this one as well, which is what we want. But notice that the server's player is actually underneath there and not being affected. And that's because we said we want local player authority, which means that this player here doesn't have authority over that character that the server owns. Now, in the case of the client, when you use the arrow keys, you're actually moving both characters at the same time. And that's pretty much because this client isn't really distinguishing between all of the players that are in the scene and who owns what as far as that flip code is concerned. So we need to add just another little script that's going to turn off the flip code for all of the other characters that don't belong to any particular client. To do that in Unity, we will create another C# script, and we'll call that setup local player. Open that up, and we'll replace this code with this bit of code. So this code has a networking component picked up from the Unity engine. I've also got a UI there, which is actually just left over from before, so I can actually delete that. And the code, what it's doing is very simply is when this code starts up, when the item this is attached to comes into existence and starts running, we're testing if it's the local player. So if it's the player that belongs, or if it's the character that belongs to the client that it's running on, we want to enable the flip code. If it's not, we want to disable the flip code so that the arrow keys are only going to work on the character that belongs to the client and it won't affect anybody else. So save that and go back into Unity and drag and drop that script onto your prefab of your character. Let's just check that it's now there down the bottom, and we can now build this out and test it again. Press play in the editor to start up your server. Okay, so there's our character there. I'll just actually turn him around so you can see the difference. Now this client will connect, and now that's only moving its own character, and you can see the server's character underneath there, which will move independently across the network. Now the last thing I'll show you quite quickly is how to make these characters start up in different positions. So let's just turn that off. Go back into the editor, and we're going to create something called a spawn point. So in the hierarchy, right click, and we'll go create empty. And to that empty, we're going to add the network start position component. And it also needs a network identity. And in this case, we don't need to actually tick any of the boxes because it's only going to be a place marker for a spawn location. Let's just rename this to spawn point. Now the thing about spawn points is that they have to be a prefab in order for the network manager to know where they are. Just before I make a prefab though, the position of this spawn point, let's set it to 0, 0, 0. Now the reason I'm doing that is I'll quickly show you by just running again and press host. Okay, so our character currently gets spawned there. But where is there? It's probably 0, 0, 0. But with it running, we'll just check. So we'll click the hierarchy and have a look. So it's at 0, 0, 0. Okay, so that's where it's currently spawning by default. Now, if we want to spawn it, let's just say over here, then we would actually need to move that monster in the X direction. So taking a look at this value here and what you'd like it to be, let's say -3 is a good spawn point, and then +3 would be a good spawn point as well. So take the spawn point that you created before and we'll make a prefab out of it, and we'll actually move this spawn point over to -3, and then we'll create another spawn point from the prefab, and we will set that to +3. Now these are in the X direction. So there's our two spawn locations for our characters to appear at. In the network manager, to use those spawn points, under the spawn info section, there's this registered spawnable prefabs list. This is where we add the prefab that is a spawn point, and that's why we need the spawn point as a prefab. Okay, so you don't put these spawn points into here. You put this spawn point prefab. Okay, so let's just add that. Now, when our characters spawn, we can set it to spawn at random locations. Now, the problem if you do it at random spawn points is if you only have a few spawn points, you'll get characters appearing in exactly the same spawn point. Now, we've got 2 spawn points and we're testing with 2 characters. So I want 1 at each. And so we changed the spawn point method to round robin so that the first one will go on one spawn point and then the next one that connects will go on another spawn point. So they'll be in different locations. All right, so with that set up, we can now build it out again. Okay, so here's our 2 windows. Let's just start up the server. And let's start up the client. And now you can see that they have different spawn locations. It's actually a little easier to see those transformations being sunk across this network connection. Okay, and that's the basics of setting up your Sprite transformations to sync across a network. Remember, if you'd like to learn more about Unity networking, I have a course on Udemy, so please check that out. It goes all through networking, right from the very beginning basics up to more complex things such as matchmaking and lobby systems.